everybody. It's so good to be here virtually. And first of all, thank you all for joining the Gutman Library Book Talk. As Mayan introduced me, I'm an acquisitions editor here at Harvard Education Press, and I am delighted to introduce you all to the absolutely fabulous authors of System-Wise, Continuous Instructional Improvement at Scale. We have here in person, and I wish I could be there in person to join you all, but we have here Adam Parrott-Sheffer, who is the strategy advisor for the DataWise project and co-chair of the DataWise in Action program. He teaches university and professional education courses on anti-racist coaching, equity for school leaders, change management, and he works with school and nonprofit and business leaders to improve learning through data. And I hear he's also running for a school board in the upcoming in Chicago in the upcoming November election. So fingers crossed. Carmen Williams is an assistant superintendent of instruction and innovation at a Massachusetts public school district and is co-chair of the DataWise in Action program with over 20 years of experience as a teacher, principal, central office leader, and university instructor. David Rease Jr. is the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Belonging in the Prince George's County Public School System, and previously he was Director of Continuous Systemic Improvement for PG County, where he led a team to build coherence in how central offices and school teams approach continuous improvement. And finally, Kathy Parker Boudett is a Senior Lecturer of Education here at hep.gse and the Director of the DataWise project. She's been the co-editor of and co-author of DataWise and DataWise in Action and co-author of MeetingWise. And I'm delighted to be working with her on the forthcoming 3rd edition of DataWise. And now let me introduce Liz City, who's one of the original authors of DataWise and author of other HEP titles, including instructional rounds of education, who will be moderating this lovely conversation. And let me just thank you all again for being here. It's such a pleasure to attend virtually and hear you all for what will be an engaging and informative book talk. And thank you, Gutman Library, for hosting this event. Thanks all.
All right. Thank you so much, Karen, for that gracious introduction. And welcome to everyone who's here in a otherwise dreary day in Cambridge, but it's not dreary in here. And to everyone joining us from all around the world today. So we're delighted to have this hybrid event to talk system-wise, and it's an extra special joy and delight for me to be moderating because I get to sit at a table with my friends and colleagues, and any of you who's ever been a teacher, to then have your students sitting next to you, having done wonderful, amazing things, far surpassing what you could have done yourself, is like an absolute joy. So there's 3 of them who are graduates of our Doctor of Education Leadership program here, spanning cohorts 1 through 10 up here. So quite the legacy of that community. And then Kathy and I first met actually through DataWise. And really the person who was responsible for that is in our in-person room here, Dick Murnane, now retired emeritus professor at HCSC. Dick had this idea that Kathy will tell you a little more about, but I first met Kathy when we were all kind of trying to figure out, what do we do with all this data that could be actually helpful? And we've known each other for more than 20 years now. And as you all probably know, getting to know people through joyful, hard, important work is one of the most amazing ways to build long, deep relationships. So I have that with Kathy. So it's an absolute joy to be here. Karen did a lovely job introducing people, but I want to turn it over to my table mates here to tell us whatever else you want to say about your current role that we didn't hear. If there's anything else you want to just slide in there. But mostly I want to hear, like, why did you think it was important to work on this book? It's kind of hard to write a book with 4 people. So like, why was this a thing that you wanted to do? So why don't we just start just to my left here with Adam, and we'll just go right down the row. All right, so
I think you just went to the other room.
Yep, there we are. Yeah, there we are.
Oh, look at
We're
that.
here.
There we go.
All right. All right. So Adam, why this book? Why do you want to work on this? And anything else you want to tuck in? You know, any pitches for anybody who lives in Chicago to vote for you for school board? No, I'm kidding. What else do you want to tell us about why?
I think we'll get in Harvard trouble if we do that.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Probably.
So Adam Parrott-Sheffer, I think first and foremost is like what I love about the DataWise community is that we are so up from the classroom in terms of everything that we do. And so even this book came from folks who are saying, we got to start learning about how do we do this across our system, right? Our teachers became principals who became district leaders. And we had the privilege when, Carmen and I's time here overlapped with right at that sweet spot when so many people wanted to say, how do we start to really make sure that people are creating schools that are collaborative, that are grounded in evidence, where we don't just look at it, but we get something done on behalf of kids. And so for me, that was really exciting to be here trying to figure that out with a bunch of really smart districts across the country and across the world. And then I got to work with this group of people. And for all of you who think writing a book by yourself is fun, it's really the work of doing it with other people. Maybe not in the moment, but you get so much smarter. Like every month we would have these great conversations about what really is going to matter for kids. And if you want to get smarter, write a book with people who you greatly respect.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. So again, my name is David Rease Jr., and I work in the Prince George's County School System. So many, many years ago, a colleague and friend of mine, Michelle Shannon, who happens to be in the room, we started doing work in the Prince George's County Public School System. And I ended up joining that school system as a full-time employee, stopped doing my independent consulting with Michelle, though we're friends forever. And as we were scaling DataWise across 208 schools and the central office departments, we knew that we needed to capture the learning that was happening around scaling this across a lot of different departments, and people needed an anchor for their learning. And it was difficult to kind of talk about, well, here's a slide or here's some guidance, this is what we're doing. People needed a text or something that kind of codified the information so they can kind of innovate from there. So that's why I joined the team, so that I could be a part of helping to document the work.
Thanks, David. Again, my name is Carmen Williams, and I currently work as a central office administrator and assistant superintendent of instruction and innovation. I was excited about this book because I was a young principal with a lot of ideas and no know-how back in Indiana, and our district adopted DataWise as a school improvement process. And I thought it was the holy Bible of school improvement. And so my team really took it on. And we did great work, and our central office staff was not available. They were not supportive. They were not walking the walk. And so I saw this as an opportunity to really create symmetry across a district so that improvement belongs to everyone and we can shoulder the work. It's important work.
And I'm Kathy Boudett, and this, as so many different things throughout the DataWise practice has been, sort of became an irresistible thing to join. I feel like, David, maybe 10 years ago, you sent me an email that had an outline of what a book at DataWise at the system level would be. And then 8 years ago, Adam sends an outline of what a book at the system level could be. And I was like, how many more outlines do I need to receive before I understand that this needs to happen? And so being able to work with this team to put out there some of these ideas has been huge. And one thing we say, I think in both the back of the book and a little outtake video that the amazing JJ Munoz made for us, is that this book actually could have been written by any group of the DataWise coaches that are around the world. One thing that's been so joyful is being able to share a set of principles and values with folks. And so you're getting our best wisdom, but there are so many people maybe listening to this call, some of whom we were able to feature in this book, whose work this also is. So that feels really good.
That's amazing. Okay, so we have a little bit of the why. Let's go to some of the what. And so the way we're gonna do this, as like many book talks, I'm gonna just pepper them with questions for a little bit here, but I'm gonna make sure I save at least 15 minutes for you all to ask questions, both from virtual land and from this room. So be thinking about what those are. So my first question for you all is, what part of the book is resonating with you most today? And Kathy, why don't you start us off?
Is this a good time for me to
Yeah, this is
share okay.
this is the only one they have slides for,
Okay,
and
yeah.
then we're going to be a little more spontaneous. All right.
So I think for me, what really resonates about system-wise is a little bit of that walking our own talk, which is in the sense that we have been building on and trying to improve ever since we started. So just a brief history of DataWise is that back in 2005, and be staying tuned for our 20th anniversary celebration, which we will be planning for 2025. But that's when the original DataWise book was published with 19 authors from the Boston Public Schools and from here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, principals, teachers, grad students, professors. And what came out of that was this now something we lovingly call the swoosh, which is an 8-step improvement process. And that is the very process that we use to try to, that basically I'd say bubbled up from the practitioners we were working with as a way to take the high road when using data to improve instruction and not go kind of toward teaching to the test or doing things that would game the system. I'm looking at Mary Grassa O'Neill right now and thinking about how, I think, was it within a year of it coming out, you're like, you say we do an institute here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and we did, and that meant we were able to share the work with others, which meant we could then follow others. And when we did that, we realized that there were some needs for additional DataWise books because we were doing the DataWise process on ourselves, and we learned two things, among many things, but two that I'll focus on right now. One was that 8-step process by itself wasn't enough, and places that only did the 8 steps didn't get traction. It needs to rest on the ACE habits of mind, which we realized, and I can think of Dick and Liz and I up in Gutman 403, trying to figure out what are these habits that people bring that makes the actual 8 steps sing. They are a shared commitment to action, assessment and adjustment, intentional collaboration, and a relentless focus on evidence. And around that intentional collaboration, we realized not only did we need to revise DataWise in 2013 to show those habits, but we needed a whole other book called MeetingWise that Liz and I worked on, because intentionally collaborating is something that you cannot take as a given, but it's teachable and people can get so much better at how they work together. And then in 2022, Candace Bocala and I began to sort of pull together everything we were learning about the need to really foreground equity as the why behind DataWise. We did a search of the old book and found that there was no word equity anywhere in the first book. We felt like that's why we had written it, but we hadn't been clear about that. What you're seeing right here is a possible new what shall we say, a book cover for the new book that's coming out in about a year. And what it does is it takes that 8-step swoosh. It's still resting on the 8 habits of mind, but now there's this halo of equity questions that go all around. And those of you here in person, you can see it's right on our table. We found that if you ask these particular questions, they will kind of force a team to use an equity lens. And that's not necessarily our book cover because it's not coming out yet. And then we move to the present day, which is 2024. SystemWise is out, and we needed to add yet another component. And so this is, you still need the sort of what, how, and why of DataWise, but we've learned in all the work to make SystemWise come to being that there are 4 components of a system-wise approach, and they are now the under foundation of the SystemWise book.
All right.
And in that, I want to add one more piece here. So when we think about the system-wise approach, it was very important for us that we collect the real lived experiences and stories of a diverse array of people from around the globe. We have people coming from 3 different continents who are of different racial backgrounds, coming from different religious backgrounds, and they've worked in different types of schools in those 3 continents. They share their stories and their experiences, and they share a lot of truth around the rigor of the work. And it was very important for us when we talked about what it is and how you do it, that we centered those people and their stories. So that's who you see here, the co-contributors.
All right, thank you. You want to keep going? Who else?
Sure. You hit the next slide.
Sure.
Thank you. My favorite part of the book is this idea around the radical inclusivity framework. And so we adapted this from the cultural iceberg. You all are familiar with cultural iceberg. And this idea that what we see on the surface comes from a deeper place. Our values, our beliefs, our assumptions are what really informs what people see and our actions. And when you're thinking about a community, a corporation, an organization, a school district that is shifting to a culture of data, you cannot leave your values and beliefs behind, right? That is so important to the work. And so besides collecting quantitative and qualitative data, it's really important that you examine your why grounded in your values, your core values, and how to enact those, and using them as a set of criteria for the decisions you make system-wide. And so this developmental path, as we call it, moves us from simple awareness into a radical inclusivity. If I was being cheeky, I would say from being woke to actually doing the work, right? Because it's really important that people acknowledge their values. It's something else for us to collaborate and deliver. And that is what you will see these prompts walk you through. Like, how do we actually deliver on our espoused values? It's one of my favorite pieces.
And we encourage being cheeky today. I think that'll make it a much more interesting book talk, so.
Are you sure you want to give this panel?
Maybe not you. Okay, everybody else can be cheeky.
David and Adam, control yourself. Everybody else.
All right.
All right, how about you,
Next
Adam?
one. Yeah, so, I'm living in this political world of our schools right now. And so one of the things that I keep coming back to that feels so relevant from this book is this notion of symmetry. One of the things that we found place after place is you can begin to deeply understand your organization by just looking at one altitude of it. If you see what's going on with the superintendent in their cabinet, if you see how the board interacts with the superintendent, you're going to see that trickle down. You're going to see that's how departments interact with each other. You're going to see that's the biases and values that principals bring to the ways in which they lead their schools. And then what you're going to see is that that's what happens in the classroom, for good or for bad, right? So if we have command and control systems where superintendents are micromanaged, where people are stressed out trying to things up, what we see when we start working with those schools is classrooms where teachers are doing the heavy lifting, where teachers are trying to make sure that there's no room for error, instead of the classrooms that we aspire to, right? Where kids can be creative, where kids can explore, where kids can make mistakes, where there's opportunities for leadership from our young people. And so as we look for symmetry, part of the reason we do that is because if we really want to create the school systems our kids deserve, we're going to have to look at those levels and start to influence those cultures. And so we think a lot about that those shades are reflected throughout. The other big idea that comes with that is, at the same time, the job of the board is not the job of the classroom teacher or the kids in the classroom. That the parts have to fit together in a way that is reinforcing, that ensures that everybody's doing their part so that the whole ecosystem works together. And so as we started working with system-wise leaders, these were the two things that were in play, right? Like, how is everyone knowing what their part is and able to shine in it? And then also, how are we attending to those, things that are starting to trickle out, right? Culture leaks. And we want to be able to figure out how do we address that so that when it does it in a way that's really going to be supportive for kids.
Awesome. All right. So you can already hear there's so much in this book. And as you might have gotten a sense that with the title, like system wise, if you're really trying to think about the complexity of a system, there's going to be a lot in it. And that was just the highlights. There's a lot more in there. So one of the things that struck me as I was reading the book and I was thinking about all the juicy things in there, we've got stories, we've got tools, we've got protocols, we got steps, but we've also got habits of mind, et cetera, is you have a line in the book that says, we give you permission to hack this book. And I thought, well, that's awesome. And then you say, you don't really need our permission, but we're giving it to you anyway. So I thought that's probably really useful. So what does that mean exactly? So for all these people who are going to be diving into systemized book, there's a lot in there. What does it mean to hack the book, and why do you think it's important? And any of you who wants to can take that one.
I'll take the first stab at that one. When we started really trying to figure out how to do this work well in Prince George's County, there were people who had a deep belief that if there is a step one, it necessarily comes before step three. Therefore, you have to do them in sequential order. And I was somebody who was kind of a renegade, and I was saying, can we like just start with what makes the most sense for us? And because I kind of got to test things out in my own way, I realized that it was really important that we allow people the opportunity to know that improvement can happen in a lot of ways, and rarely does it happen in a step-by-step process. So that's the big hack. One example of that would be in Prince George's County, where just last month, we were able to center the stories of 3 different families who have students with disabilities. And we were doing systemic professional learning for all 18,000 employees. And we did a lot of work over several months to put it together, but each of these 3 families from different backgrounds shared what their challenges were, getting support for their students with disabilities, what some of the promising practices were that were happening in the system. And all employees, whether you're a bus driver, a principal, a teacher, somebody who works in finance, got to watch and learn and understand how their work connected to people. And so in that sense, we kind of started with step 3 of the process to kind of get people interested in seeing how there could be shared ownership in the problem of practice. But then from there, it's like, don't you want to come work with us? Don't you want to be organized for collaborative work in service of making sure that we make things better for these families? So that's an example of how you hack. Start with what makes sense for you, and then back end yourself into another part of the work.
Love that. Who else? Anybody else want to? Let's not do the death by panel thing where all
Perfect.
4 of you respond to every question. But if anybody else wants to chime in on the I told you we could be cheeky. But if anybody else wants to chime in on hack, love to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. In my district, we have been working on our own equity journey, and we have a coalition called Real, and it's racial equity action leadership. And we have been working on an action plan for the last 4 years. And it was time to say, are we measuring the right thing? What was the purpose of this group? Are we doing what we set out to do? And so we kind of started at step 6 and 7, where we were reevaluating what were the action steps that we actually committed to. Are we following through with those with fidelity? And what are we measuring again? Is this group expected to change equitable outcomes at the student level? Is this group responsible for hiring and recruiting and retaining diverse staff? Like, what is the goal of this group? Are we just messengers? Are we doing PR in the community about who we are as an anti-racist, anti-bias organization? And if so, how do we know it's working? And so we just went through the swoosh by starting with step 6 and 7. And so now we're circling back to, okay, we need to see this story, step 3, and dig deeper into data. And so we started asking our members a lot of questions, a lot of surveys. We started following up with people outside of the coalition to say, what's your experience? Do you even know what this is? Do you know what they do? And so we kind of, we went out of order a little bit. But the foundation was there. The ACE habits of mind were there. We had a relentless focus on evidence. We did it collaboratively, right? And we were willing to assess at every step of the way, what's working and what's not, and how do we know?
Thank you. So it does sound like you didn't even sort of start in one place and then sort of make sure you go around in the order. You're saying, we're going to do what makes the most sense for where we are and what we think needs to happen. So we're going to go 6, 7, then 3, then maybe some 4, and then,
Another thing, this book clearly builds on an institution, DataWise, right? A brand, it builds on it. And our leaders come to us with assets, right? And so we need to understand who the team is. And, sometimes they need a level of data literacy, but sometimes they've already been doing that for 15 years, right? So we're not going to spend as much time on this stuff, and that's okay.
All right, great. All right. So now that we've hacked the book, I think one of the things I've seen people have the biggest challenges with over the last 20 years of watching people wrestle with using data and trying to improve both schools and systems is that sometimes the using data part becomes the end rather than the means, right? And so one of the things you write about in the book is the difference between doing data-wise and being data-wise and how that can take some time. So that's my little prelude so you can be thinking, but here's the actual question. So in the book, you talk about the ACE habits of mind, as Carmen, you were just saying, radical inclusivity, which you also talked about, and then other strategies to build a culture of equity and collective buy-in system-wide for the data-wise cycle. What have you learned from all of the work you all have done all over the world about the difference between doing system-wise and being system-wise? Would love to hear any of your thoughts about that, because I feel like it's a bit of the holy grail of improvement is like, how do you move from data as end to data as just one piece of your process? Who wants to take that one?
Seriously, no one's jumping in on this one.
That's a good one.
So I think one of the ways that I talk about this is kind of our own learning as an organization. Right? There was so many times that I think that even in the data-wise world, right? There's a question you get all the time from people who are starting something is, am I doing it right? Right? If you're asking, am I doing it right? You're talking about doing data-wise. Right? You're focused on the steps, you're trying to figure out the pieces, and we've got tools to help you reflect on that. There becomes a shift where you go from, am I doing it right, to what do I see that I add to this conversation about how we make schools equitable? And for me, that's the biggest shift, right? When you're trying to learn how are other people doing this, what are the rules of engagement to being a contributor through our network or through, writing the books, writing the next chapter of things, making sure that this work works in Peru versus Australia, and being able to make those modifications to it. For me, a huge part of becoming system-wise is realizing that you're part of the answer and building that next level of work. I don't know what do others think?
I'll try to sum it up, but by saying it this way. For me, being system-wise or being data-wise, you know that you're doing it well as a leader when you have hard evidence that lots of different people can tell you the truth about you and your practice. So if you are being system-wise, you have comported yourself in a way that allows people to give you that feedback, which means you don't do things to shut people down or to keep them from, you don't lash out. You're invitational so that you get that hard feedback. And if you're someone who hasn't had the benefit of that, and I had some even with this team when we were writing the book, then you probably have some work to do to support collaboration, because people can't collaborate with you if they can't share truth with you. So on.
Okay, so let's follow up on that. There's two sort of interesting pieces about that to me. One that you write about in the book is you got to implicate yourself in the work. So you show that in a lot of ways in the book. One is by including the stories of people who have been doing the work, and there's a lot of vulnerable stories in there, both from you all and from other people, about like the messiness of that, right? So there's this piece about implicating yourself. That's interesting. There's this other piece about learning that's kind of implicit in there. And one of the things you all wrote on page 16 is that system-wide leaders know that the person doing the work is the person doing the learning. I thought that was quite striking, and also goes to the, like, who's doing the heavy lifting in the system. So talk a little bit about the role of learning. Like, once you've got some of that intentional collaboration built in where people might speak some truths, like something comes up, and then like, what do you do with the learning? Because that seems to me a pretty key part of that movement from doing to being.
Kathy's gonna let me speak so I can talk about her and shout her out. When you are a leader, you have to be vulnerable. And I feel like that's what that quote is speaking to, this ability to be vulnerable about your learning. We used to talk about things like failing forward, right? But it's not failure, it is learning, and it's a perpetual state. And so if you're committing to being a lifelong learner, this improvement process, then you're kind of debunking this idea of achievement and excellence and some arbitrary standard that will be met and static, right? And so implicating yourself is really a constant practice, like a prayer practice, like a yoga practice. It's a practice of saying, what else? What else? What else can I do? What else can we do? Who else could we be? What is still left on the table? And how do I bring the wisdom forward to understand? That's the opportunity. And so as Kathy talked about DataWise as an institution, evolving over the course of time, it's modeled, right? And so when we bring in words like symmetry into the book and into the work, that has to be the parallel across the organization. It has to start with the top often, but sometimes it's a grassroots movement, right? But everybody has to eventually get on board with, we are learners. This is the way we work.
So Carmen, can I give you a follow-up to that?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's so powerful and also really hard in a system.
Yes,
Because
it
the
is.
part of being in a system is that the system is the system. The system is producing the results that you've got. And some of that is not at all in your individual control, or you individually would have just changed it, right? So how do you as a leader kind of live that tension and being systemized of, I'm going to implicate myself, I'm going to really implicate myself in it, and I'm going to try to hold that this system is producing the results that we're getting. Like, how do you live that tension?
I don't think it's an either or. I think it's an and. And so through collaboration, I'm adding, right? And so I'm influencing, I'm bringing people in, they're joining. And so this is where our values have to be super explicit and linked in some way, right? And so as a particular leader picks up this book, we don't recommend that they pick it up and read it alone, right? This is a team sport. We focus on collaboration. And you're building these muscles and mindsets together, not in isolation. And so, yes, I'm implicated for my part because the role I play is really important. And I get to share that autonomy and accountability with everyone else on my team. So now it becomes, well, who do you see as your team? Who is your team? And that might be another mindset shift for systems.
And I would want to tag on to that. What Kathy did and what leaders do is they ask for help when they're in that moment of, I'm representing the system, something needs to evolve. And when you read the book, you'll see the stories of, I need help and support from the system to make this change happen. And that's why you see all of these co-authors and conspirators, for lack of a better word, who helped us pull this together.
Yeah, I'll just add one piece, and I'm thinking of looking at Meg Lockwood, who's here with us in person, and the extensive work she did with the team of inquiry facilitators in the Boston Public Schools. And I feel like I learned an awful lot from them. They were charged with going to schools and helping the schools do DataWise themselves, but the team was always looking at what they were doing. And at first, when I saw the little tweaks they were making, they seemed like kind of small things that they were doing. Like, oh, we're going to add like a little pulse check to catch something. And I knew how busy they were. And I found it interesting that they were willing to make those small changes. But those small changes within a system, if they're really done authentically, have like the system, in a way it could slow you down, but it can also speed you up because of the ripples that are possible. And so that piece, I feel like I learned from Megan from Boston.
Which is an interesting connection to the symmetry and coherence piece that Adam was talking about, right? Like the very things that can slow you down can also speed up the work when you get the things aligned. Okay, so let's think about, you got this system, hopefully people are implicating themselves, they're living this both and kind of system, implicate self, also collaborate with people. I think a lot of times the people who don't identify as directly connected to academic data kind of feel off to the side in these conversations, like, oh, the data we're talking about is learning data and I'm not directly connected to that. So what does being system-wise look like for people who don't have direct connection to the academic data, like the ops people, HR people, the benefits team, all these people who actually make the stuff run on time. And if you're going to be system-wise, you would think you'd want everybody in the system. So how does this apply to folks who work with that non-academic data?
Yeah, well, we've got some experts in the back here who have helped us with some of our non-academic ops teams. But I think some of the things that we really think about this with is twofold, right? Is if you work within a system that is focused on the learning of others and you can't point to how your work is going to influence the learning of others and the relationship with that learning, chances are what you're doing is not needed. So you better figure out how it connects. And these groups of folks are totally doing that. Right. We have worked over the past year, with folks who are doing this work in HR. And, they sit down and at first, the first thing that everyone says is like, I don't even know why I'm here. This is all the teachers and why am I in this space? And, we sit down and say, all right, well, let's step back about what's a problem you're trying to solve? Like, where is something that's going on here? And they're like, our teachers aren't staying. They leave after, 30 days into the school year. And then we've got this big gap to fill and we don't have the substitutes for it. So we start to walk back and be like, oh, now if you had to tell that story to folks, how would you do that? What are the evidence sources that you have? What are those exit interviews that you can start to pull the qualified pieces from? And we start to think about what is the story here and why does it matter for our learners, for our young people? And they start to go like, oh yeah, this is really important. Oh, if I did have to just take this one piece of data to tell a story, this is what it would look like. And all of a sudden they're sharing this and they're going to board meetings and presenting and saying, hey, this is what's going on here, right? They'll start to talk about things like when our budget's happening with our finance team, they were, this is again, I'm from the instructional side of the house for the most part, but they were talking about things like, we get data here, principals are not spending down their money. And then, it's tens of thousands of dollars that are being lost. And we're like, well, there's a story. Look at that. How many dollars are being lost in your district because the grant money isn't being spent in time? Let's now convert that into positions, into after school programming that we could buy, right? Like, what's the story there? And there's this real agency that comes in, like, then you tell that story back to your principals and say, what are we going to do about this? What do we solve here around this particular need? And so for me, it's once you get to that root of why your work matters for the people who are coming into our institutions to learn, the stories start to emerge and the investment emerges. And you start to get that pollination between, the ops side and the instructional side that usually are very siloed.
Okay. And it sounds like a key piece is starting with some stuck place, something that is really present for them. And like, how do we then figure out what's going on there, tell that story, and then connect it back to learning in some powerful way?
One of the things that we have found, and this is a challenge particularly of system leaders, but it's for everyone, is that we live too much in our own head, the prison of our own skull, right? And so too often we're telling stories that ignite our curiosity, not the folks that we're trying to influence. And so much of this work is actually trying to start to see your organization, not through your eyes, but everyone else's. And once you start to be able to say, oh yeah, I'm really persuaded by quantitative data that's put in a chart, see you Ray there. But actually for my teachers, they need the heart message. They need the qualitative. They need that student like in Kintaro's story who says, you're really talking about us that way. And that one story of like that human-centered thing will motivate them for the next, decade of their career. So for us, I think so much of this is realizing that it's about being able to see what other people need, not so much how you see the system.
All right, I got two more quick questions for you before we open it up to the audience. So One that I just have to bring in because I loved this language. You talk about having a vision of wild success for instruction, which I just loved. Like, who doesn't like the idea of wild success more than like, I'm gonna have a vision? You're like, bleh, you know? So wild success. So I want to kind of put that back to you and say, what's your vision of wild? You got to say it like that. Wild success for system-wise. Now that you've got this book and these ideas out in the world, what would wild success look like?
Kathy?
I mean, this will bring us right back to the opening slides I showed, but wild success would be people around the country and world are doing this with such passion that they say, oh my gosh, we need a new edition. Like there's so much more that we need. And then they're willing to share with us how they hacked the book, what they did, what was useful, and we have more to say.
I work in the state of Massachusetts and our MCAS scores just came out. And it is likely that Massachusetts will again be #1 for some. And I know the people in this room know exactly what that means. And so my hope, prayer, and wild dream for success for this book is that we actually undo that story, that we stop perpetuating the same scores, the same outcomes, and we actually get improvement for all kids.
For me, wild success, I'm going to make it very local and contextual to the Prince George's County Public School System. So we had about 18,000 employees who learned about how to support students with disabilities. Wild success would mean a groundswell within the entire community of almost 1 million people where there was a higher demand for ensuring that those students and families got the resources that they need and that we didn't stop until we fix the problems that we see helping that community.
For me, it's that we have a common language that believes a whole lot more about our kids than we have previously. And that when we default to things, we default to a belief that our kids are amazing and capable of things that we haven't even imagined yet.
I feel like we should stop there, except I promise you could have questions. All right, so I'm not going to ask my other question because I want to make sure the audience has time for questions. So folks in the room, you can just raise your hand and I will call on you, and please use the microphone that's on your table. You can just press the button. You don't have to hold it down to turn it green. Folks in Zoom land, you have a Q&A function there that you can put your questions into, and we'd love to have them. Mayan's going to give me a little flag when we have some in there. So let's give the folks chatting in a minute to do that. In the meantime, I know somebody in this room has a question. Who does and wants to go first? Yeah, go ahead.
Would any of you share how the process and lessons from writing this book have influenced you in your work?
So I am over instruction and innovation. And innovation is a really fun title in a traditional school district. And so what we have been working on is thinking about how do we operationalize our learning vision for students. And so we have a portrait of a graduate, which is amazing, and a lot of districts have them. And we were trying to figure out how do we move that from the poster to our actual work, because it's so important. And so through the work of a psycho, we came to realize that while we completely trust our leaders and they have a lot of autonomy to lean into their expertise, we hadn't figured out how to build coherence in our professional learning so that our teachers, leaders, all of our instructional folks were actually spending time on the vision components that could help us operationalize this graduate. And so that's how I've used the work, the tools in the book and system-wise in my work over the last year.
Just for maximum questions.
I'll have one per answer. Okay.
One per
Yep.
answer, unless you're burning to jump in. I also want to invite anybody, we have folks who joining us, I know, who are actually in the book telling their stories. And so if you are one of those people in Zoomland or in the room who told your story and you want to share anything about that experience, what was it like? You know, how does it What did it feel like? What is it like to see your story amidst others? We'd love to hear that reflection too. But I know we had a couple questions at that table. Mary, you look like you have the mic, so go for it, and then you can pass it over to your colleague at the table.
Here we go. I've played this game before, right? I know where the mic is. Congratulations on your new book. It's very exciting. Will you tell us one or two big success stories?
So I think one of our biggest success stories that we've had recently, and to use this as a teaser, is there's a system-wise leadership institute coming that each day will actually be anchored in a case study from a district who has done this work. And so one that I'm particularly excited about, because I think that their problems are so common to all of our districts, is as their guiding team, which is a term that we use for the folks who are trying to make this sort of thinking happen across the system, when they started looking at their data and evidence of kind of where they were with implementation, their big challenge was recognizing we have Christmas tree initiative addiction, and had gotten to 30 some different things that they were trying to do in a small district of, about 8-ish schools. And they realized, oh, we're doing this, our principals are doing the same thing, and everybody's ticked off and feeling unsuccessful. They spent an entire year using this process to get closer to these are the 3 things we're focused on. And so they used DataWise to actually become a much more coherent organization and wrestled with the year saying, is this really a big thing? Or is this something that we can put aside for now or give to another team, and really got the district to say, this is what we care about. And so for me, that was a huge success because it gave everyone permission to be good at a few things as opposed to bad at everything and never feeling good enough.
Awesome, thank you. One more in the room and then we'll go to Zoom land.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the discussion. I really enjoyed it. I'm an ELOE student here. I'm Pavni, and I work with the state government back in India. I'm not familiar with the DataWise framework, looking forward to learn more in the G term. But looking at this framework, I know that this is something that my institutions need back home. We are a society leading 268 institutions in the country, state, serving underprivileged students. So from your work and taking this DataWise framework to many countries outside US, what do you think are some of the challenges in adopting this framework in developing countries where there is lack of resources or data collection systems?
Thank you for that question, Pavni. It's been interesting as we've brought this to different places, or as it's been more like our readers or the people who've taken our MOOC have brought it, and we've been able to learn and connect with them. But I've been interested to see that there's some ways in which the problems are very, very similar no matter what the context is. And there's some places and ways where there's a cultural shift that needs to be made in order for the process to be useful. So I would say in our work in Latin America, in particular in Chile and in Brazil, there's been some shifts that need to happen along the intentional collaboration side. If it's a place where there has been a traditionally hierarchy and having everybody around the table express their opinions is not something that's common, that can be something that needs to maybe be worked in, and it may take a little time for that to take hold. There's also, we talk a lot, and I think this probably comes from my own bias around wanting to use time especially well. There can be places where putting time limits on objectives within an agenda feels very off-putting, and we just need to keep speaking until we've solved a problem. And so giving people the chance to both see what has been offered, but then make an adjustment so that it makes sense in their context. And then I would say that the issue of just, is the data that is needed available. As some places, there's not a state test or you can't really trust it because of the way it's administered. And in those cases, we always come back down to, well, what do you have? And whatever is being created within classrooms, we say start there. That's worked beautifully in Brazil for sure, and our colleagues in Australia, especially the ones who are focused on the work of students with special needs. Sometimes it's just, let's look at what is right in front of us and not worry about whether the higher stakes data is helpful.
Can I just jump in with one other piece is that, so if you look in the book, Rafael Corman is someone who's led a lot of this work in Brazil, and I think has some good lessons there for you. But I would also actually say, one of the things that we love about this is we don't have to have that answer. We're asking you to join the family. Right? We know that there's a part of it that we can bring. We have some pieces here, but like the best work that happens is when somebody comes, they come to an institute or they read the book, we get these random emails from all over the world and they're like, I'm so excited. And we're like, great, how can we help? And what we have found is that our job being open, being ready to say, hey, be part of this community, because we can't solve those problems. We don't know anything about them. And it would be crazy for us to have an opinion on them. But we know that in collaboration and in conversation with you, when you go back to that place and we stay talking about this, that great things are going to happen for young people where you are, and you know, you'll get to brag about it too. And so for me, that's our biggest answer is, if you see it, join the party, come bring it with everybody else, and we're going to work on it together.
I'm going to jump in really quickly and invite you to talk to Michelle Shannon, because she has some experience supporting a school in India with the DataWise process. So she'd have a lot of interesting things to share.
And this is how it works. This is how it works. I love it. I love it. Diane, what do we have from the Q&A? Any questions in there? Excellent. Okay. I have more questions, but I'll see if anybody else in the room has questions first. What you got? Yeah, Ray, go ahead.
Okay, what didn't make the book? Like, either it was a debate that you all had and it didn't win, or it just missed the cutting room floor that you couldn't fit it in the book?
Okay, thank you. We had almost half a chapter written on the value of having a coach join your team when you're doing the system level work. And instead, we kind of embedded it in the ongoing case study to say the power of having a coach or someone riding alongside with you that is more objective, perhaps, can help show you some things that you wouldn't see on your own. I think that was probably the biggest thing for me. Yeah.
Anything else anybody wants to add? Things you left out?
I mean, I feel like if we hadn't had a page limit, we would have told even more stories.
Yeah.
But we kept on like looking at, you know, we wanted it to be like a book where you're like, oh, I can read that, you know, not like a phone book. And so if people didn't get asked to tell their story, it's not because we don't know you have great stories. It's just because we didn't need it more stuff.
Chapter 6 on action is probably half as long as the content that we wrote for it, but I think Liz has a book coming out that will help address some of those pieces.
Nice plug. I'm not going to take that bait just yet, since we're talking about your book. Yeah, it's a hard thing when you're trying to write a book you want to be useful, right? I love that you just said phone book, Kathy. Like, people actually have a visual these days of what a good old fashioned yellow page phone book looks like. That was awesome. All right. Any other questions? Any other questions in the room?
That's a record player.
Kathy and I are in our glorious decade. It's a glorious decade, so I can tease her. All right, other questions?
Thank you. I'm looking forward to read the book. A quick question. So I worked in Dubai and India, and we collected a lot of rigorous data on academic progress, but we never did on student well-being. So I'm curious to know how that would influence intervention, and if you have any thoughts on collecting data on student well-being and incorporating it in other assessments.
I bet you do have some thoughts based on my reading of the book. You want to jump in there, Carmen?
Sure, yes. So we definitely encourage you thinking about anything and everything as data. We talk a lot about street level data and student experiences, and Shane Saphir and Jamila Duggan wrote a book called Street Data, and we're not here to promote that book. And we quote that book because it's powerful to understand student experience. And so student well-being in an academic center are the same thing, right? Their academic work is explicitly tied to their well-being. And so our district has a survey on culture and climate that kind of looks at how do students feel about their teachers, about their peers, do they feel safe in school? And then we also have a Metro West survey that looks at mental health, has mental health questions to help us understand in general respects, right? Not student specific, but in general respects, how our students are doing as far as anxiety or having a sense of belonging. And so we definitely use that data to determine what are the professional learning opportunities that we need to make sure we have for our teachers so that they can be aware and responsive to that student's well-being. And so in some settings, it's called culturally responsive pedagogy. In some settings, it's called SEL. That people have mixed it.
In
They're
some
not
settings,
always
you
the
can't
same.
call it either of those things.
Yes.
Yeah,
you're
no,
right.
for real,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
If you can talk about student well-being.
Yes, and so sometimes we need to pull that apart and parse it apart, but either way, we definitely recommend using those sources of stories and data to understand student well-being.
All right, we are in our last minute. Are there any burning questions from Zoom land before we wrap up? Okay, great. So one thing I'll just highlight in the spirit of the coherence and symmetry you talk about is it was striking to me that when you talk about getting to the part where you're seeing like, how's it going, which is where you said you all were hacking, Carmen, you were checking on both how people felt about the change process and the improvement process and what kind of results you were seeing. And it was really striking to me that you were actively collecting that well-being data in many ways about the adults too, and not just the kids. So I think that's another example of the symmetry piece is we gotta, when we're doing improvement, which is hard, we have to check how do people feel about it, as well as what evidence do we see that we're making progress toward our vision for wild success. Okay, so we have to wrap up because it's 1 o'clock Eastern time. Mayan, can you put that slide up one more time, please? So as Adam said, there's an institute for people who are interested in learning about this system-wise process. There's this amazing book. And I believe there's also some kind of discount for the book. Does anybody in the room know about that? Yes, discount? Anybody know about that?
For people here in the room, the book is being sold outside in the hallway. And everyone else online can get a copy with a 30% discount code. Check your registration email and you'll get another thank you email for attending with the code and link to purchase.
Oh, all right, there you go. Money off. I thought that was important. So the last thing I want to say is you can hear in the team the way they really implicate themselves in the work and the way they use each other and their colleagues in the work as mirrors. And I think there's a lot of themes in this book. There's themes of humility, courage, confidence. I love the case study because it shows how messy the actual work is. It's messy and hard, and they make that really visible. And I think we heard here today also how they model all the themes that are in the book about doing the work in their own work. So I just wanted to appreciate them for that vulnerability and for showing us what it looks like to do the work and for sharing their wisdom with us today. So please join me in thanking these authors.